because from cybersecurity architecture standpoint, planning licensing matters a lot because it directly correlates with cost. So you have P1, you have X amount of P1 licenses, or you have, for example, Y amount of P2 licenses, and the answer to us is not actually going to resonate with that. Maybe the answer choice is just literally be focusing on P2, for example, for Azure Identity Governance, while the question asking for P1 or vice versa. So if you can just find those opportunities, it's automatically going to remove the choice, right? So this is, since it is MCQ type style of questions, so you are basically knowing the probability of getting the answer right is improved drastically. Even if you remove only one choice, is always pretty good. And starting on May this year, Microsoft announced that you will be able to take unscheduled breaks during the new accommodation request process they developed. Please read through the link provided here to understand how this process works. And I have heard some people faced issues with this new feature where the proctor revoked their exam for violating their terms. Microsoft is working with Pearson View to retrain all the proctors to make sure all issues are solved. Again, personally, I prefer if you could take and finish the exam in one sit without breaks, it would be great. Anyway, the option there if you want. You can also see demo, the exam experience, like in sandbox environment to see how it looks like. Now, on what not to do. First of all, this is a mistake I made myself in the past, and a lot of my students made as well. So they spent inordinate amount of time learning the PowerShell command. Just to be clear here, this exam is not too much technical, so you don't need to learn on how to deploy and install things. I'm not saying that you don't learn them, but this exam is not about PowerShell. This exam is not about scripting or automating, even not DevOps exam, not kind of at all. So the idea is that you need to know very basic, and if you go to the docs.microsoft.com for most topics, you will see how to do over there. One more thing, don't memorize the Azure portal settings either. This is important because there will be some screenshot that you're gonna see in this crash course where the option for the feature, but do not memorize, like where the download button, for example, for this report where you can get it, because the option can move around. Features come and go very quickly in the cloud. Things move around quite a bit. But the point is like learning them, not going to help you here. This is not a memorization exam, but just knowing where are in general, like identity governance and Azure AD have a tab with 5 features under identity governance. So you need to know where they are located, but you don't really need to know exactly the positioning of those. And the last one, this is like a really basic one, going beyond the objectives. And it is very easy to do. A good example where a lot of my students like spend way too much time where they should on hybrid identity, for example. Hybrid identity is very interesting and practical topic. And a lot of people actually have experience if you are working in this industry for a while because the Active Directory has been around for so long. So, but in this exam, we have a small X percentage of coverage for this topic, right? So it's not all about Azure AD. And then they are not expecting you to be a guru in this topic. They basically wanted to understand whether you know the topic at a basic level, and then on top of that, they wanted to know if you really can choose the appropriate security solution, right? That's the sort of like the core of this exam. That's all about it. Don't spend more time than needed. Maybe there are other objectives where you may want to spend the time, so you can use it. All right. Let's move now to the agenda. The agenda for this crash course is divided into 4 different modules to align, of course, with the official exam objective. This also includes knowledge checks, so be ready for those. And of course, Q&A and breaks. There are no demos in this crash course because you don't see how to or lab a question in the real exam. My main objective here is to cover all the topics for this exam and use the time efficiently here. Remember, as cybersecurity architect, you don't implement things. It is not an engineering role. However, I took screenshot from various security solutions, so you know what each took the CCSP, which is more focused on the cloud things, but it's not technical. CISSP, it's more technical. I know CISSP is more technical. The SC-100, it's more on the architecture. So you are architecture level. So it's not, you don't see technical. So it's not compared to CISSP. Okay, why would you recommend SC-300 exam? Good question. The SC-300 because it's identity, and identity is the entry point. And here in module 1, as you can see later during the course, Microsoft put more weight on the 30 and 35%. So you get more questions on identity. That's why I prefer SC-300, not only for the exam, but for everything, any solution that you need to work in the cloud or hybrid. Identity is the, let's say, the entry point, authentication, and so on. That's why it's my personal recommendation to go with the SC-300 if possible for you. Next question. Was there a lot of overlap between CCSP and SC-100? Not too much overlapping, except from the conceptual level, you will see similar. But here we are talking more about Microsoft security solution. However, CCSP is neutral vendor, so they don't mention anything about security solution brand or for product, for example, from Microsoft or Amazon or Google or any other vendors. So it's not the same. However, the conceptual level, yes. So the case studies, this kind of business continuity, security, zero trust, yes. You can see them with CCSP as well, but not the same from technical perspective. Here it's more on the Microsoft solution security. Is the certificate, next question, is the certification respected within the industry? As you talk to customer, are they comfortable with it? From personal experience, yes. This is, by the way, this is a very new certification, and Microsoft see a lot around security, and a lot of many years, last couple of maybe 6-7 years, Microsoft put a lot of effort on security, and we see it everywhere. So that's why they developed, because Microsoft took feedback from customers, and they said they won't develop. Last year, they started with the SC type of compliance identity security portfolio. We can see we have the SC-900, which is a fundamental security, the 200, 300, 400 kind of technical role, and then they developed the architecture, the SC-100. So we can see a lot, you can see from statistics and customer, yes, it is very respected, and it is very requested. So, yes. Okay. Another question. Can we do this architect exam first and do other electives later? Yes, of course. You can do this. But again, from a personal experience, they put prerequisites. So they said there are kind of contents coming from those 4 prerequisite exams. Personally, I prefer if you go through 200, 300, or AZ-500 first, because you get more into the solution, more technical things to understand. So it will be easier to digest. But if you know them, or you can go direct to SC-100, there's no problem. But personally, I prefer to go. Actually, what I have done also, I took the 200, 300 first, and then I went to SC-100. It was easy for me to go through the architecture. Another question. I'm new to this field. How is security architect role different than the blue team, red team? Good question. Security architect role, actually, the blue team and the red team, who they do penetration testing, and they play the role of an attacker, or let's say ethical hacker, and so on. So the security architect role is, you are in the architect. It's different than the blue team. Blue team is specific on doing testing to see if they can penetrate the solution, if there is flaws, vulnerability to discover, and so on. So it is not the same role. So you are in the architecture, translating the business requirement to security architecture. It's quite, large portfolio to understand. It's completely different than blue team, red team, which are focused more on the discovery, on the attack, and penetration. So yes, it's different. Perfect. Thank you for keep the questions going. So let's get with the first module. Are you ready? Okay. The first module. Design a zero trust strategy and architecture. This is 30 to 35% of the coverage. What that means is literally the number of questions you are getting. It's going to be divided in 4 modules. This one is roughly 30 to 35%. It's quite a lot. As you can see, that's something you need to keep in mind. And in this module, we have 3 objectives. You will learn how to build an overall security strategy and architecture with zero trust in mind. So this zero trust in mind is not only Microsoft concept, it's everywhere. Even CCSP, you can see it. And then see what are the different strategies for designing, defining, and recommending a security strategy and architectures. And we end up by discussing a case study, and then you need to answer a couple of questions. Ready? I will send a pulse check. Pulse check to see if everyone is ready. And we will wait for 25 seconds to let everyone please respond to it. I send the pulse check. Okay, perfect. happy for this one. Okay. Getting 50. Great. Thank you. Let's end the pulse check and move to the first module. So, section 1, about zero trust. Today, organizations need a new security model that effectively adapts to the complexity of the modern environment and to embrace the mobile workforce that we see today and protects people, devices, applications, and data wherever they are located. And it's all start with zero trust. You need to keep that in mind for the entire exam. That's very important. So what is zero trust? The core of zero trust is instead of believing everything behind the corporate firewall is safe, the zero trust model assumes breach and verifies each request as it is originated from an uncontrolled network. And regardless of where the request is originated from or what resource it accesses, the zero trust model teaches us you should never trust and always verify. So this is the main concept behind zero trust. Never trust and always verify. We will talk about each one in more detail. This diagram visually illustrates the zero trust principles. First, we have to always verify explicitly. This will protect the assets against attacker control by explicitly validating that all trust and security decisions use all relevant available information and telemetry. Next, we need to always use least privilege access. We can do this by limiting access of a potentially compromised asset with just-in-time, just enough access, and risk-based policy like adaptive access control, for example. And this is done by implementing zero trust controls and technologies across those seven foundational elements: identity, endpoint, applications, data, infrastructure, network, and visibility. And each of these is a source of signal, a control plane for enforcement, and a critical resource to be defended. And last, as I mentioned, we need to assume breach. Here we assume that attackers can and will successfully attack anything in the system: identity, network, device, application, infrastructure, and so on. So you need to plan accordingly. Now let's talk about those seven foundational elements of zero trust in more details. Now, of course, different organization requirements, existing technology implementations, and security stages all affect how Zero Trust security model implementation is planned. We can use here the Microsoft experience in helping many customers to secure their organizations, as well as implementing their own trust model. So they have developed those 7 elements as a guidance to assess your readiness and to help you build a plan to get to Zero Trust. So this is a plan we follow to achieve the Zero Trust. First is to secure identity with Zero Trust. Identities, whether they represent people, services, or devices, you define the Zero Trust control plane. And when an identity attempts to access a resource in your environment, you verify that identity with strong authentication and ensure access is compliant and typical for that identity, followed by a least privilege access principles. The second one is secure endpoint with Zero Trust. Once an identity has been granted access to a resource, data can flow to a variety of different endpoints, from devices to smartphones, laptops, partner managed devices, and on-premises workloads, cloud-hosted servers. So, this diversity of endpoints create a massive attack surface area. We need to monitor and enforce device health and compliance for secure access. We'll talk later about the security solution for each one. The next element is secure application with Zero Trust. Applications and APIs provide the interface by which data is consumed. So they may be legacy on-premises application, lifted and shifted workload to the cloud, or modern SaaS applications. You need to apply controls and technologies to discover shadow IT, ensure appropriate application permissions, gate access based on real-time analytics, monitor for unusual behavior, control user actions, and validate secure configuration options. Then it comes secure data with Zero Trust. Ultimately, we need to protect our data, right? Where possible, data should remain safe, even if it leaves the devices, application infrastructure, and networks the organization controls. You need to classify, label, encrypt data end-to-end, and of course, restrict access based on those attributes. This is data with Zero Trust. The fifth element is to secure infrastructure with Zero Trust. Again, infrastructure, whether it's on-premises servers, cloud virtual machines, containers, or microservices, all of these represent a critical threat vector. You need to assess version, configuration, and just-in-time access to harden the defense. You can use telemetry and signals to detect attacks and anomalies, then automatically block and flag risky behavior and take protective actions. We must also secure networks with Zero Trust, because as we all know, all data is accessed over network infrastructure. Data cannot move without network. Network controls can provide critical controls to enhance visibility and help prevent attackers from moving laterally across the network. So by segmenting your networks and go deeper in network micro-segmentation, deploy real-time threat protection, end-to-end encryption, monitoring analytics will help you to secure your networks. And the last element of Zero Trust principle is visibility, automation, and orchestration. As you will see in Microsoft Zero Trust guides, they define the approach to implement an end-to-end Zero Trust methodology across identities, endpoints, devices, data, applications, infrastructure, and network. And these activities increase your visibility, which gives you better data for making trust decisions. And with each of these individual areas generating their own relevant alerts, we need an integrated capability to manage the resulting influx of data to better defend against threats and validate trust in transaction. Now, moving to section 2, we'll see how to build an overall security strategy and architecture. Now, the term security strategy means to reduce business risk from attacks and ensures confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The CIA triad. So this is a well familiar concept in the security field to ensure those three pillars are well respected. So that's built into information systems and data. An architecture is defined as a specific design to address the information system and fulfill the organization security requirements. So having an efficient security strategy and architecture is most beneficial when you have multiple engineering teams working on the same cloud platform, for example, in Azure. You have multiple subscriptions to manage, for example, or you have regulatory requirements that you must enforce. For example, defined standards that must be followed for all cloud resources. And a good security strategy and architecture help you maintain control over the applications and resources that you manage in the cloud. You do this by maintaining control over your environment, just to ensure that you stay compliant with industry standards, such as, for example, the ISO 27001 information security management, or corporate or organizational standards, such as ensuring that network data is encrypted, or you have offsite backup of your data. Now, I want you to look deeply at the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures, known as MCRA. The Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures describes the Microsoft cybersecurity capabilities. These reference architectures describe how Microsoft security capabilities integrate with Microsoft services and applications. Microsoft also cloud platforms such as Azure and Microsoft 365, third-party applications such as ServiceNow or Salesforce, and other also cloud platforms like Amazon AWS and Google GCP. So this reference architecture is primarily composed of detailed technical diagrams on Microsoft cybersecurity capabilities, zero trust user access, security operations, operation technology, multi-cloud, cross-platform capabilities, attack chain coverage, and Azure native security controls. So it's huge. It also includes an overview of zero trust and a zero trust rapid modernization plan. Additionally, it includes other key information on security operations and key initiatives like protecting from human-operated ransomware, securing privileged access, moving beyond VPN, and more. You can download the entire PowerPoint presentation that covers each capability of the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture from the URL shown at the bottom of the slide. And if you prefer a video instead of reading, check the second URL on the right side here. This is on YouTube channel, so it is same, but in video format. So for some people who likes to the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures used for. The primary use case of this, it represents the full organization security landscape, demonstrating how key Microsoft technologies fit into that landscape. It can be used as a starting template for a security architecture. The most common use case is to help you define a target state for cybersecurity capabilities. Because many organizations find this architecture useful because it covers capabilities across the modern enterprise state that now spans on-premises, mobile devices, multiple cloud, IoT, operation technologies, and so on. It can also be used for comparison as a reference for security capabilities. Some organizations use it to compare Microsoft architecture recommendation with what they already own and have implemented. And many organizations find that they weren't aware that they already own quite a bit of security architecture technology. So they do it for comparison. And the third one, you learn about Microsoft integration investments. It can help security architect and technical teams to identify how to take advantage of integration points with Microsoft capabilities and existing security capabilities. Last, you can also use it to learn more about cybersecurity. Earlier, I get a question about starting cybersecurity, what cybersecurity role, so this could be used for those new into cybersecurity as a learning tool to prepare for their first career or a career change as well. Let's now see how to develop security requirements based on business goals. So as a cybersecurity architect, you are translating the business goals. So the most successful cloud transformation journey start with business goals. And cloud adoption can be costly and time-consuming effort. So you need to get the right level of support from stakeholders. So you are not only one in the organization. You need support from other areas of the business to succeed here. This topic is designed to help you identify business outcomes that are concise, defined, and drive observable results, or change in business performance supported by a specific measure. During any cloud transformation journey, the ability to speak in terms of business outcomes support transparency and cross-functional partnerships. The business outcome framework starts with simple templates to help technical-minded individuals to document and gain consensus. It can be used with business stakeholders, so you can collect a variety of business outcomes, which could each be influenced by a company transformation journey. So the main objective of this is to simplify the conversations that can quickly engage stakeholders without getting too deep into the technical solution. And by understanding and aligning the key performance indicator, KPIs, and business drivers that are important to stakeholders, cybersecurity architect can consider about high-level approaches and transformation before they implement the security solution. Let's see now how we can do this. So we have the Cloud Adoption Framework, CAF, which consists of tools, documentation, and proven practices that will help you to accelerate your cloud journey adoption. The CAF includes different stages, as you can see here. We start by defining the strategy. Here you answer why you are moving to the cloud and what you want to get out of cloud migration project, for example. Do you need to scale to meet demand or reach new markets? Will it reduce cost or increase business agility? So defining your cloud business strategy, you should understand cloud economics and consider the business impact. You have global reach, performance, and so on. Next, you make a plan. Here you build a plan that maps your motivated goals to specific actions. A good plan helps ensure that your efforts map to the desired business outcomes. You always need to align with the business. When you are ready for your organization, here you create, in step 3, landing zone, or called an environment. It is an environment in the cloud to begin hosting your workloads and applications. Next, you adopt the cloud. You begin to migrate your application to the cloud. Along the way, you might find to modernize your application and build innovative solutions that use cloud services. And the Cloud Adoption Framework breaks this stage into 2 parts: migrate and innovate. Last, you govern, manage, and secure the cloud environments. Here you begin to form your cloud governance and cloud management strategies. As the cloud estate changes over time, so do cloud governance processes and policies as well changes. So you need to create a resilient solution that are constantly optimized and secured. So I highly encourage you to look at the URL on the lower left corner of the slide, where you can find further guidance for each of these phases of your cloud adoption journey. Now, next, I will talk about the govern and the manage stages in more details, which is the focus more onto security. So here are the steps in the govern process of this stage. First, methodology. So you need to consider your end state solution. What is the end state solution that you want to accomplish? Then you define a methodology that incrementally takes you from the first steps all the way to full cloud governance. Then we have benchmark. You can use the governance benchmark tool to assess your current state and future state to establish a vision for applying the framework. The CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework baseline, helps you to start creating a governance baseline foundation for your organization. And then we have the initial governance foundation. You create a minimum viable product, MVP, that captures the first steps of your governance plan. Last, you improve the initial governance foundation. You iteratively add governance control that address tangible risks as you progress toward your end state solution. Now, on the manage side, we have also 4 steps. You start first is to establish a management baseline. A management baseline is the minimum set of tools and processes that you should be applied to every asset in your environment. You define your minimum commitment to operations management and then define business commitments. So you document supported workloads to establish operational commitment with the business and agree on cloud management investment for each workload on each application. Next, you expand the management baseline, so you apply recommended best practices to iterate on your initial management baseline. And last, we have the advanced operation and design principles. So for workloads that require a higher level of business commitments, for example, you perform a deeper architecture review to deliver on your resiliency and reliability commitments. So those are the govern and manage of the cloud adoption framework. Now let's see how to translate security requirements into technical capabilities. And the internal transformation process typically includes digital transformation of the business to capture new opportunities and to stay competitive against digital native startups. And then you go to technology transformation, which is to support the initiative with cloud services and modernize development practices and relate changes. And then we have the security transformation to both adapt to the cloud and simultaneously address and increase the sophisticated threat environments. And based on the organization security transformation, you enforce security design principle is to enforce the zero trust architecture. The security design principle describes a secure architecture system hosted on cloud or on-premise data center, or a combination of both, could be hybrid as well. So application of these principles dramatically increases the likelihood of your security architecture. And Microsoft has created the well-known Azure well-architected framework known as WAF. Do not confuse it with Web Application Firewall, because this is a security solution, WAF. So this is well-architecture framework. Reference includes 7 design security principles. They are listed here, as you can see, starting from the plan resources to automated and use least privilege, classify and encrypt data, monitor system security, you plan incident response, identify and protect your endpoints, protect against code level vulnerabilities, and last, test against potential threats. So these 7 critical design principles are used to assess the security of an application deployed on Azure. They provide a framework for the application assessment questionnaire. You can assess your workloads using these principles using the Azure well-architected framework. This assessment will take around 30 to 60 minutes to answer all these questions. I have also included the URL here in the slide, so you can learn more about this assessment. Now moving to talk about the strategy that you should know about to design security for resiliency. Most organization and enterprise application workloads have defined a recovery time objective, RTO, and a recovery point objective, RPO requirements. So you should have an effective business continuity and disaster recovery design, which provides platform-level capability that meet those RTO and RPO requirements. So what are the design consideration and recommendation for an effective business continuity and disaster recovery strategy? When you start designing your BCDR for application workloads, you need to consider several factors. We start first by the application and data availability requirements. You need to look for the RTO and RPO requirements for each workload. You can do this through the business impact analysis exercise, BIA. For each application, you check if it is support active-active and active-passive availability patterns. Then you check the business continuity disaster recovery as a service for platform. Here you need to look for native DR and high availability feature support, geo-replication and DR capability for past services, if they support multi-region deployment or for failover, for example, availability zones compared to availability sets, impact on update domains, what is the percentage of workloads that can be under maintenance at the same time. So those, you can evaluate this during the BCDR platform. Then you go to consistent backup for application and data, and check the network connectivity if a failover occurs. So the bandwidth capacity during plan is important in the business continuity. Then you check the planned and unplanned failover. For example, IP address consistency requirements and the potential need to maintain IP address after failover and failback. For example, Azure Key Vault, disaster recovery and backup for application keys, certificate and secrets. Now on the recommendation design side, to support the BCDR for application workloads, here we talk about the solution or solutions that you can implement in Azure. You can use the Azure Site Recovery, ASR, for Azure to Azure VM, and on-premises DR scenarios. Site Recovery uses near real-time replication and recovery automation to replicate workloads across regions and on-premises as well. We can also use the multi-regions and peering location for connectivity. So redundant hybrid network architecture also ensure uninterrupted cross-premises connectivity if an outage affects an Azure region or peering provider location. You can also use the native Azure backup capabilities. Azure Backup is platform as a service. This helps you to remove the need for third-party backup software and infrastructure. Some organizations, they have their standard, they want to use their own backup solution so they can bring it to the cloud and store it in the infrastructure as a service. But a native backup is always, you don't worry about the infrastructure behind it. Also, avoid using overlapping IP address ranges for production and DR sites. When possible, you need to plan the BCDR network architecture that provides concurrent connectivity to all sites. Now let's talk about how to plan and implement a hybrid environment. This is also another topic called out in the SC-100 exam. The hybrid deployment offers the ability to extend the future experience and administrative control with the existing on-premises environment to the cloud. And a hybrid deployment can also serve as an intermediate step to moving completely to a cloud environment. On the identity side, we have the Microsoft Identity solution that span on-premises and cloud-based capabilities, creating a single user identity for authentication and authorization to all resources, regardless of the location. The concept is known, as we all know, the hybrid identity. There are different design and configuration options for hybrid identity. We'll talk about it later, using Microsoft solutions. In some cases, it might be difficult to determine which combination will best meet your needs. Again, it's based on the requirements of the scenario that you will get in the exam. The diagram shows as an example of a hybrid identity solution that enables IT admin to integrate their current Windows Server Active Directory solution located on premises with Microsoft Azure Active Directory to enable users to use single sign-on, SSO, across applications located in the cloud and also on premises. On the hybrid network connectivity side, this reference architecture shows a secure hybrid network that extends on-premises network to Azure. The architecture implements a DMZ, it is called a perimeter network, between the on-premises network on the left side and the Azure virtual network on the right side. So this is typically called the hub and spoke network topology architecture. Here we have all inbound and outbound traffic passes through the Azure firewall appliance. If you don't want to use the Azure firewall, you can also bring and use your preferred third-party network virtual appliance firewall as well. Another challenges that many companies struggle today is to control and govern increasingly complex environments that extend across data centers, multiple clouds, and edge of network boundaries. Microsoft introduced Azure Arc, if you heard about it, that simplify governance and management by delivering a consistent multi-cloud and on-premises management platform. You can use Azure Arc that provides a centralized, unified way to manage an entire environment by projecting existing non-Azure and on-premises resources into the Azure Resource Manager control plane. You can also manage virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, and databases if they are running in Azure. You can use also familiar Azure services and management capabilities regardless of where they live. You can also continue using traditional IT operations while introducing the DevOps practice to support new cloud-native patterns and environments. And you can also configure custom locations to extend the Azure and as an abstraction layer on top of the Azure Arc enabled, for example, Kubernetes cluster and cluster extensions. This is important also in the exam. Now moving to Azure Policy. Also with the hybrid environment, at scale, we can manage it with Azure Policy. This is very important on the exam. You will see questions for sure around Azure Policy. We'll talk more about Azure Policy in this course as we go along. And quick introduction, if you're not familiar with Azure Policy helps to enforce organizational standards and to assess compliance at scale. Through its compliance dashboard, as shown in the screenshot, it provides an aggregated view to evaluate the overall state of your environment with the ability to drill down to the per resource, per policy granularity. It also helps to bring resources to compliance through bulk remediation for existing resources and automatic remediation for new resources as well. The common use cases for Azure Policy include implementing governance for resource consistency, also helps in regularity compliance, security, cost, and management. And the policy definitions for these common use cases are already available in Azure environment as built-in to help you get started. So you can use the built-in policies. When you get advanced, you can create your own policies. As the built-in is available, you can leverage them. And the Azure Policy uses the JavaScript object notation, JSON format. Anyway, you don't get how to create JSON policy in the exam, but this is using the format, the logic behind it. The evaluation uses to determine where a resource is compliant, whether a resource is compliant or not. Definitions includes metadata and the policy rule. The definition rule can use functions, parameters, logical operators, condition, and aliases to match exactly specific scenarios. We will talk about the conditions and the policy effect that Azure Policy supports later. In short, the policy rule determines which resources in the scope of the assignment get evaluated, because you can assign which scope on the subscription, on management group, on the resource group, and the resources are evaluated at specific times during the resource lifecycle, the policy assigned lifecycle, and for regular ongoing compliance evaluation. By default, the standard compliance evaluation cycle occurs every 24 hours. Of course, we can force and trigger the compliance scan anytime using PowerShell or the API. Azure Policy is not only for Azure services, you can also use it for on-premises servers and multi-cloud with Azure Arc. Okay, I talk a lot.